Welcome. This series of videos goes deep into the four fundamental archetypes of the mature masculine: the lover, the king, the warrior, and the magician. Each archetype gets 4 videos: the full light of what it is, the wound beneath it, the shadow it produces in men and in the world, and the final video is about the path to genuine integration. Watch in order of the videos or start wherever you feel the pull. Either works. I still recommend to watch all 4 videos at least of each archetype together. I am Luna Ora, author, priestess of the temple of Isis and Lilith, and a woman who has spent over a decade working with men in the most honest spaces I know how to create. This series is built for all my brothers, from everything that I have witnessed in my work and beyond. I love you so much, and thank you. There is a hole in most men. Not a metaphor, but a felt, physical, often unnamed absence that sits somewhere in the chest and has been there so long that most men have simply built their entire lives around it without ever examining what it is. It is the place where the Father's blessing was supposed to land, and unfortunately it didn't. Not because most fathers were monsters, not because most men had terrible childhoods or dramatic trauma or fathers who were overly cruel, but because most fathers were themselves uninitiated, themselves unblessed, themselves carrying a hole in the same place, passed down from their fathers and their fathers before them, in an unbroken chain of men who never received what they needed and therefore could not give what they did not have. The father wound is not always loud. It is not always obvious. It does not always look like abuse or abandonment or violence. Sometimes it looks like a father who was simply never there, not physically, but presently, who sat at the dinner table every night and was somewhere else entirely. Sometimes it looks like a father who was there but could not see his son, who related to the performance, the grades, the achievements, the compliance, and missed the actual human being underneath, and his heart, of course. Sometimes it looks like a father who loved fiercely, but whose love came with conditions so consistent and so early that his son learned before he could speak that being himself was not safe. However it arrived, the wound is the same. A boy who needed to be seen by his father, who needed to be told, not in words necessarily, but in presence, in attention, in the quality of being genuinely met, that you are real, you are enough, you have what it takes, I see who you are, and I am proud of it. Most boys never got that, and most men are still waiting for it. Today we are going into what that waiting costs and what it takes to finally stop. So why does the father wound shapes the king more than any other archetype? Just as the mother wound is the hidden archetype of the lover, shaping a man's relationship to feeling, to receiving, to the feminine, the father wound is the hidden architecture of the king, because the king is the archetype of power, of authority, of the capacity to hold a domain and bless what is within it. And a boy's first experience of all those things, power, authority, blessing, happens in the relationship to his father or whoever stood in that role. His first experience of what masculine authority looked like, whether it is something that creates safety or something that creates fear, whether power in the hands of a man means protection or threat, whether the person above him in the hierarchy sees him clearly or uses him for his own needs. All of that lands in the nervous system before the mind can process it, and it becomes the template. The template for every relationship with authority that follows. Every boss, every institution, every moment when life asks him to step into leadership himself. Every encounter with his own power, what it means to have it, how to hold it, whether he deserves it, whether it is safe to use it. The king archetype carries that template, and if the template was formed in wounding, in the tyrant father's dominion or the weakling father's abdication, the king will express that wound until it is consciously faced and integrated. Now, the father wound produces two opposite expressions in the king, two directions of collapse. And I want to describe both in detail because most men will recognize themselves somewhere in this, even if they have never had the language for this. So, the first wound, the tyrant father. The first wound happens when the father's power was not in service of his family, when his authority was organized around his own needs, his need for control, for compliance, for the reflection of his own importance in the faces of the people around him. This father ruled through fear, through intimidation, through the consistent, often subtle message that love was conditional or performance. That the boy's worth was measured by how well he served the father's ego. Not even the father's heart, but especially the father's ego. Now, that disagreement was dangerous. He learned that being too much, too loud, too expressive, to himself, basically to disagree with the father, would cost him something. This boy grows into a man who has a deeply distorted relationship to power. He goes in one of two directions. The first direction, he becomes the tyrant himself. He has learned that power means domination, that leadership means control, that the way to be safe is to be the most powerful person in the room, because in the room where his father held power, the only safety was at the top. He may be extraordinarily successful. He may build companies, lead movements, accumulate enormous influence, but underneath all of it is a frightened boy who learned that the world is a hierarchy and the only safe position is above everyone else. His leadership is extractive. His relationships are transactional. His power creates compliance but not trust. And the people around him, his employees, children, his partner, they feel the constant low hum of fear that is the tyrant's signature. Now, the second direction that this man can go is he becomes the weakling in reaction. He has seen what the tyrant's power does to people. He has lived inside of it. And he has made a vow, conscious or unconscious, to never become his father, to never use power that way, to never make anyone feel what he felt. Which sounds noble, right? And in some ways it is, but the reaction against a tyrant father often produces a man who cannot hold power at all, who collapses when challenged, who mistakes passivity for kindness, who abdicates the responsibilities of leadership because leadership reminds him of domination, and domination reminds him of his father, and his father reminds him of the most painful thing he has ever experienced. This man is often deeply caring, often genuinely good, and profoundly unable to be the king his people need him to be. Now, the second wound. The second wound is the absent or weakling father. The second wound happens when the father simply was not there. Not necessarily physically, though sometimes that too, but presently, emotionally, in the quality of his attention and his engagement and his genuine interest in who his son actually was. This father was not a tyrant. He was a ghost. He provided, he showed up, he did the external things that a father is supposed to be doing, but the interior lights were off. He was somewhere else, in his work, in his depression, in his own unresolved wounds, and his son could feel the absence even when his father was sitting right next to him. Or perhaps the father was simply a weakling himself, a man who had never been initiated, who had no model for what real masculine strength looked like, who was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of fatherhood and retreated into passivity, alcohol, porn, into endless hours of television, into anything that did not require him to be fully present and accountable. This boy grows into a man who has no template for the king. He has never seen it. He does not know what it looks like in practice. He knows what masculine authority looks like from the outside, maybe from culture or from media, movies, internet, from other men's, performances, maybe from a book. But he has never felt it from the inside. He has never been held by it, never been blessed by it. And so he tries to build the king without a foundation. He may achieve enormous things. He may accumulate all the external markers of masculine authority, but there is a persistent uncertainty underneath, a voice that asks, sometimes quietly, sometimes deafeningly, who gave you permission to be here? This is what the voice says. Who said that you had the right to even lead? Who told you that you were enough? And the answer, which never fully arrived, was supposed to come from his father. Now, I want to spend a little time on this because I think it is the most important psychological piece of the king archetype and the most misunderstood. The blessing is not praise. It is not encouragement. It is not the father saying, "Good job," or "I'm proud of you" in response to an achievement. The blessing that I'm talking about here is something much more fundamental than that. The blessing is the father's clear, grounded, unconditional recognition of his son's worth, not for what he does, but for who he is. The moment communicated in presence as much as in words that says, "I see you. I see what you are made of. I see your strength and your struggle and your humanity. And I am telling you with the full authority of a man who has lived longer and faced more that you have what it takes, not to be perfect, not to never fail, but to be a man, to hold your ground, to be trusted with real responsibility." And this blessing that I'm talking about, when it is given by a real king to his son, lands in the nervous system as permission. Permission to take space, to hold power, to lead from the heart, to be wrong and also recover from it, to be human and still be worthy. Most men on this planet never received it. And the absence of it creates a specific kind of hunger that follows a man in his entire life. The hunger for the father's blessing is one of the most powerful and least discussed forces in male psychology. It drives men towards father figures, bosses, mentors, spiritual leaders, coaches who carry the unconscious hope that this man finally will see me clearly and tell me that I am enough. It drives men toward achievement, building and accumulating and succeeding in the hope that the scoreboard would finally provide the certainty that the father's presence never did. It drives men towards the approval of other men, the constant, exhausting performance of masculinity in the hopes that the peer group will provide what the father did not. And none of it works, not permanently, not deeply, because the hunger is not for achievement or approval or success. It is for a specific thing, the specific weight of being seen clearly by a man who's seen you trust, and nothing else fully satisfies it. Now, here's something I see again and again in the men that I work with throughout so many years, and also men that I've known. And I want to name it directly because most men do not recognize it in themselves, even when it is running their entire life. Beneath the king, beneath the power, the authority, the responsibility, the role, there is often a boy. A frightened boy, an unblessed boy, a boy who learned very early that the world was not entirely safe and that love was not entirely reliable and that being fully himself carried risks he could not afford. And that boy, however deeply buried, however thoroughly covered by decades of achievement and competence and performed strength, is often the one actually making the decisions. The king who snaps at his team when he feels undermined. That is the boy who learned that challenge means danger. The king who cannot delegate. That is the boy who learned that depending on others leads to disappointment. The king who needs constant validation from the people he leads. That is the boy who never received a blessing and is still looking for it everywhere. The king who collapses under pressure or abandons his responsibilities when things get hard. That is the boy who was never shown that a man can face difficulty and remain standing. The work of integrating the king is, in a large part, the work of finally meeting that boy, of bringing the full adult masculine presence to what was most wounded in early life, of giving the boy, not through therapy, not through analysis, but through genuine inner confrontation, what the father could never give, of becoming, in a very real sense, the father he needed. This is what Moore and Gillette call self-authorization in their book. The moment a man stops waiting for external permission to be who he is, stops waiting for the boss's approval, the peer group's validation, the culture's recognition, and gives himself from the deepest, most honest place inside of him that blessing. Now, I see, it's the place that he says, I see what I'm made of. I know my strength and my limitation. I know what I am for. I know my good, I know my bad, I know my shadow, I know my light, and I am enough. That is not arrogance. That is the king coming online. I want to add something here that I think is essential and rarely spoken about as well. The father wound does not begin with your father. It begins much further back. Your father was wounded by his father, who was wounded by his father, in an unbroken chain of uninitiated men carrying unblessed wounds, doing the best that they could with what they had and passing along, not from malice, but from simple limitation, what they never resolved in themselves. This is the masculine lineage most men have inherited, and not a lineage of kings, unfortunately, a lineage of wounded men performing kingship with the tools the tyrant or the weakling gave them. And here is what is both sobering and extraordinary about this. You are the place where that chain can end. Yes, brother, you. Not through blame, not through the endless excavation of everything your father did wrong, but through the willingness to face what you inherited and take ownership of that, honestly, without denial or creating drama, and to choose consciously and deliberately, maturely, to become something different. A man who does this work does not just change himself. I can promise you that. He changes the entire lineage. He becomes the father his children will not need to recover from, even if he doesn't have children. The leader whose people will not need to protect themselves from. The king whose domain, however large or small, actually flourishes under his care. That is not a small thing. That is the most important thing a man can do for himself and for this world. Integration is not destination. It is not a moment of arrival, but there are signs. A man whose king is beginning to emerge stops needing approval before he acts. He still welcomes counsel. The real king always welcomes honest counsel, but he no longer needs the counsel before he can move. He has developed the capacity to stand in his own clarity, even when others disagree, even when it costs him something. He starts to bless others genuinely, not to flatter. He has no interest in flattery. It feels dishonest to him, but to see clearly what is real in the people around him and name it. His children notice it. His team notices it. His partner notices it. Something changes in the quality of his attention. It becomes less conditional, less needing of performance. It's more simplified and steady and honestly present. He starts to hold his domain with an open hand, to understand that his power is not his possession. It is his responsibility, and that the measure of his kingship is not how much he controls, but how well what he leads flourishes. He becomes capable of being wrong without being destroyed by it. The tyrant cannot be wrong. Wrongness threatens his power and his ego. The weakling cannot be wrong because wrongness confirms his unworthiness. The real king can be wrong. He can be wrong. Acknowledge it clearly and directly to himself, correct course, and remain standing. Because his identity is not built on being right. It is built on being honest. And his relationship to the feminine changes. This is key. He stops needing to dominate her or avoid her. He starts to recognize her as the mirror his leadership most needs. He builds in his relationships, in his organization, in his communities, the conditions for the feminine to speak freely and honestly, because he understands that the health of what he leads depends on that honesty and truth. That man, the man whose king is coming online, is different in every room he enters. He's not louder. He's not more dominant. He's not more impressive. He's a lot more real and present and honest and genuinely trustworthy, and he cares. And in a world full of tyrants and weaklings wearing crowns they did not even earn, this kind of man is extraordinary. Now, in the next video, we are going into the shadow in its full depth, the tyrant and the weakling, both personally and collectively, because what we are seeing in our political systems, our corporation, our institutions, and our families right now is the king wound playing out as a civilizational skill. And naming it clearly is the first step towards something different. This is how we can change it. If this video opened something to you, if you felt the absence of the blessing landing somewhere in your chest, let that be there. Do not rush past it. That feeling is information for you. That is the place where the real work begins. I will see you in the next one. Please subscribe, like, and share so I can continue making these videos and share the work of the temple. And may the goddess bless you all.